Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Earthdawn Survival Guide, a podcast for all disciplines, paths, players, and game masters, and enthusiasts like Josh and myself. I am Dan.
I am Josh.
There we go. And on today's podcast, we will be talking about all things quizzical and thaumaturgical, because we're going to cover up two very long emails that we got from our listeners. Thank you, gentlemen. And we're also going to talk about the initial acquisition of your elementalism spells for all you budding magicians out there. So if you want to have a question for us, or would like us to talk about anything we haven't talked about so far, or cover something else in further detail, we are in, of course, year 2, but feel free to email us at edsgpodcast@gmail.com. And without further ado, Josh, do we want to announce anything, or should I just go right to the emails?
No.
Fair.
Nothing to announce that I didn't already mention.
Yeah.
We talked about, like in an earlier show, the books that we had been waiting on for months from the printer finally arrived at the distributor. I know as of this recording, the palette for all the stuff for the international backers is on its way to England to be put together for shipping from there. And the domestic stuff is starting to be packaged up. Once we have tracking numbers, we'll be sending those out to people.
Fair enough. I appreciate the information for all the listeners. I think they do as well. So keep tuned to your mailboxes, folks. Stuff will be arriving sooner than now. So on to Brian's email. This is kind of, like I said, we got two long ones. So, hi there. I was listening to your discussion of first and second circle wizard spells, and as I have a character who is a wizard, I thought I'd mention something I consider very important. Don't forget that at Circle 5, wizards can give self-only spells to others at a cost of 1 point of karma. Bedazzling display of logical analysis is only restricted to the wizard until Circle 5, and the same applies to speed reading and a few later spells that you are presumably going to discuss. This can be really fun with multiple discipline magicians, but I presume that's beyond the scope of this specific discussion. Likewise, while I presume you'll discuss the effect of Wizard Mark when you mention the spell itself, I would consider it worth bringing it up again anytime you're talking about short-range beneficial spells that a wizard might cast, since for a wizard, there aren't necessarily so short-ranged. It may also be worth bringing up the effect of extra threads in some cases. For example, Identify Magic becomes much more reliable if you can weave a couple of extra threads to it.
Yeah, those are all fantastic points. We didn't get into that with our discussion of wizard spells because we were just talking about the first couple of circles. Yeah. But that is a very, very
Beautiful
good point to bring up with regards to the wizard. Each of the spellcasting disciplines gets a karma ability at Circle 5 that alters how they can use their spells. And it's different for each of them. For the wizard, they can take those normally self spells and change them to touch, I think it is, to put them onto somebody else. So yeah, spells that initially might be limited only to the magician can be expanded to other people. And Wizard Mark does a similar sort of thing where the wizard's ability to manipulate magic and do things that other magicians can't to the same extent, though each magician discipline obviously has their own kind of tricks and stuff that they can use. Yes, excellent points all around.
Thank you, Brian. We've got more from Brian. Also, regarding Rope Ladder, the spell, it is worth noting that nothing prevents you from attaching stuff to the rope yourself before making it carry up to 600 pounds for you to a target location, merely that the rope can't do it for you. For example, a grappling hook, so that the rope can easily attach to things, or a basket full of tools that you'd like to move to the other side of a wall, or a length of chain that can, air quotes, hold your obsidian friend's weight. Of special note, the Circle 5 wizard spell Light and Load can greatly increase the value of this spell, and also Levitation, since neither of these two spells otherwise allows you to increase the weight they can hold. Oh, and also, regarding disbelieving spells, the illusionist knowing when someone decided to disbelieve is only half the equation. It's also important to consider whether an illusionary fireball that your friends disbelieve is noticeable. It is of note that an extra thread can remove targets from a regular fireball spell, so not roasting your friends is not necessarily a dead giveaway, although I don't imagine your typical bandit or cave troll necessarily knows about that either. Thank you, Brian. Rope ladder?
So, two things.
Yes.
Rope ladder. Yes, that is actually a good point, that you can tie things off ahead of time and then use the rope to move or carry or whatever.
Yeah.
It sounded like, I thought that he was using rope ladder on a chain. But I think he might have tied the rope off to a chain to have the rope pull the chain up to a location or something like that. That's certainly allowable. I would not allow rope ladder as is to just be cast on a chain to be able to do with a chain what you can do with a rope.
Fair.
I think if your objective was, yes, I tie a rope to the end of the chain, like tie them to each other, and then cast rope ladder and use rope ladder to drag or move the chain, then that's all perfectly fine as long as it's not breaking the weight limits, which you need quite a bit of chain to break the 600-pound limit.
No, fair. The disbelieving spells thing.
The other bit about disbelieving spells, that is a good point, and if it was, I don't know, it might have been the same person. Somebody brought it up. It has been brought up in other places that the illusionist can remove targets from the effect of the spell. That's actually something that is not exclusive to Phantom Fireball. Many of the damaging spells have an extra thread option to remove targets from an area effect. And so it's not something that would actually be super unusual for somebody who understands magic. So I don't think it would be a big tip-off that people not being affected by an area effect spell would necessarily trigger that it's an illusion. I came a long way around for that sentence, and I hope it made sense.
Would you like to summarize and I can just cut that first part out?
Because many spells allow the magician to remove targets, usually through the use of an extra thread.
Yeah.
A particular individual not being affected by an area effect spell will probably not be an indication that the spell is an illusion.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you, Brian. You brought up wonderful points. We love having the discussion, and I'm hopeful that other listeners learn something from that as well. So thank you. Keep them coming in. On to a longer email, and I believe this is our first time we've ever heard from Lehman Crafton Jr. Hopefully it was okay to read your whole name, my good man. So I've been listening to your podcast for a couple of weeks now, catching up. I'm on 27 right now, so he's 40 behind us.
He's about, he's not quite halfway through there.
Yeah, so a good half a year. I really like Earthdawn. I saw first edition when it came out, but only got to look at the book. About a decade later, one of my groups GM'd it, and I got to play. First, Windling Cavalryman, then Throal Cavalryman. The Troll was good because with high strength and dexterity, they can fight decently when not mounted. Also, from the episodes I've heard, you've touched around the edges relating to Air Sailor karma rituals being able to be performed inside, and cavalrymen working in cares because of them being cities, but haven't hit the bullseye. Many cares have had large open spaces, allowed karma rituals to be inside. Otherwise, how is the Earthdawn airship made, or how did disciplines such as Air Sailor, Sky Raider, and Cavalryman survive? Sadly, this is when life happened and I had to stop playing the game. So I'll parse this email out in sections and let Josh answer this part first.
Yeah, obviously with the larger cares, and especially ones that would have had a decent population of cavalrymen and or air sailors, the care probably would have been designed with the intent of there being space for those things to be practiced. Drakars or airboats, which were the small ones that we talked about when we kind of went over our discussion, certainly could have been used. And I don't think necessarily that karma would specifically be required to actually make the airships, in large part because it's not just air sailors that make them. You would have had weaponsmiths and elementalists that largely would have been involved in the enchantment and creation of those things. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think that the idea that the karma ritual, the example karma ritual, especially in first edition, and probably because we didn't really change the text at all in fourth edition, gives the impression of certain things, but that the karma ritual is actually fairly idiosyncratic to the individual adept, and there would be variations, some slight, some significant, in terms of how they are performed. And I suspect that the karma rituals for cavalrymen and air sailors and sky raiders probably would have been adapted to work within the structural limitations of operating within a care, because the karma ritual is kind of the way that the adept gets in touch with the magic of their discipline, whether they are actually purchasing karma with it or not. Yeah. see kind of a little bit of a divide between the mechanics and the fiction in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
Some people take a very mechanistic approach to it that, adepts would be able to figure out how much karma they have because of how many times they can do certain things. And I think that's going a little bit too far in the marrying mechanics to the fiction a little bit too much. That because of its nature as a game, we need to define and quantify things just to work within the framework of mechanics. But I don't think that, in much the same way that I can't, say, qualify my ability to play the ukulele at a rank 3 or 4 or whatever, that it is much more of a continuum as opposed to a series of steps.
Yeah.
And I think that's the case for a lot of things. But if we're going to be dealing with dice and numbers, we need to break things into levels and quantify them out.
Fair.
So karma represents the adept's ability to draw on and power the magic of their discipline, and more experienced adepts have a deeper connection with the magic and their discipline, and so therefore can do more of it. But I don't think that it is necessarily that just because circles are a thing that exist, that, the quantification of rank 3 versus rank 4 is something that is actually extant within the game. And I feel like I'm wandering afield here from the point on that. Anyway.
Okay, we got time to kill. So,
the ultimate point to get back to is that I think that the karma rituals for adepts during the Scourge, not just necessarily cavalrymen and sky raiders and air sailors who kind of have some restrictions, scouts, beastmasters, I mean, they would have needed to adapt and work within the framework of the society and the structure and the limitations that they had at the time. And there's nothing that requires the adept, a player character adept, to follow the exact karma ritual as described in the books. I think that the karma ritual should be an expression of the adept's philosophy and connection with the magic. And that while there may be some broad similarities between karma rituals of adepts that follow the same discipline, there could be differences between them.
Fair. I figured there was enough legendary material and people who had recently retired because they had to move inside the cares to foster the belief that those disciplines would survive and do all the teachings that they possibly could without necessarily a lot of the practicalities and only getting to a certain level. And then you have to kind of work with everybody else. You have to work with an elementalist to conjure the air spirit and have a makeshift boat tethered somewhere so that you could practice maybe a little bit in some open areas. I don't know. That's you have to get a little creative with those things right there. But one question I think we both blew right past was, how was the Earthdawn airship made? Did they make it in the care and then launch it out? Or did they exit from the care and then make it outside and then launch the ship?
I suspect...
Or has that never been answered?
No, but I suspect that much like I suspect that the Kingdom of Throal, given its size and scope, probably had internal airship yards.
Yeah.
That there would have been caverns and so forth where they would have kept any of the ships that they brought into the care with them. Mm-hmm. And I suspect that the Earthdawn itself was probably built inside the care and flown out of it when it set sail, because it was still too early after the Scourge for there to be a large-scale, long-term construction project like that outside. I think that strains my credulity a little bit.
No, that's fine. I look forward to...
And I just had an idea that I'm not going to mention here because I might want to pass it along in relation to a book that's being worked on.
Fair. No worries. If Josh talks about that with me off the air, I will be happy to hear. Otherwise, on to the second part of the email. After about another decade, I got invited to a 2nd edition game. Windling Weaponsmith. Awesome character. I know 2nd edition gets a lot of shade, but I enjoyed it a lot along with my group. But around that time, I found the Kickstarter for 4th edition had ended, and I bought the PDF. Although we did not change systems, people in that group were comfortable with 2nd edition, but I loved the idea of the talent options. Again, life came and hit the GM and a few players dropped off the face of the earth, and the game stopped right when I was feeling my character was about almost there. 5th circle. I was hoping to get to 6th, then find a swordmaster to train me. 2nd edition had forge armor at 6th circle, so much sooner than 1st edition. A month ago, I ended a campaign of another game, and we looked for another game to play. Earthdawn 4th edition was our decision. I'm once again picking up a Windling weaponsmith to see how it goes this time. Earthdawn is the only game I enjoy playing a fairy-type race or a troll. I normally avoid them. My group just had our first game, and it was a blast. Very happy to be in it. Now for questions. Has there ever been thought into expanding Windling weapons beyond 3 Windling choices?
Talked about weapons before.
Yeah.
And I don't know if he probably has not gotten to the episodes about those based on what he was saying.
No, because
we covered those a little bit later.
Yeah, if he's only 27 in, this is a little bit further down the road.
I'll kind of reiterate then what I brought up with the discussion of weapons and so forth from then, which is that there's somewhat of a narrow range band when it comes to weapons, a combination of size and damage. And for the most part, the connections between them limit Windlings to just a couple of choices. I think from a descriptive and narrative standpoint, there are probably as wide a variety of Windling weapons as there are weapons in general. Like, you probably have Windling axes and all of that kind of stuff, but the limitations of the mechanics mean that, for the most part, when it comes to the important stats, which are weapon size and damage, a Windling axe and a one-handed axe is going to be equivalent to a Windling broadsword. The one-handed weapons are all pretty much going to be the same basic stats. All the two-handed weapons are more or less going to be the same basic stats. And so,
just use the stats and fill in the name.
At that point, it's descriptive.
Yeah.
The differences between weapons that you have in the standard weapon, where you talk about strength minimums and weapon weights and costs and things like that. As I think I mentioned, I'm not 100% sure what ultimate use that provides. And part of that is because I'm not a big encumbrance tracking weight kind of game master. So I would say if you want to have your Windling wield a two-handed axe, it's equivalent to any other size 2 Windling weapon, and it has the same stats as those, and it just looks however you want it.
Yeah. So write the name in, just use the same numbers, fill in the blank a little bit. He says, okay, just a thought, just so you know, I like Windlings. Second question, is there any thought into support for the Foundry VTT? My group is spread over the state, so even post-COVID, we can't always meet face-to-face. Another player and myself are trying to build a system for Foundry. We use Roll20 now, but the servers have been lagging horribly, and we're hoping to try a new non-subscription platform. I pretty much like all the changes in 4th edition, optional talents, higher successes instead of armor-defeating attacks, specialists get a free talent, etc. Anyway, thanks for the great 4th edition game, Josh. I'm a freelance writer for another system, so I know how difficult writing, designing, and development can be, especially with a game that has a long-time dedicated fan base. Keep up the great work. Lemon Crafton Jr. Thank you.
We are aware of the Foundry system, the tabletop, the virtual tabletop is what VTT stands for. We are aware of Foundry. I know that there have been a couple of other people that have been working on it. In fact, I think I got a message earlier today from somebody who has one worked up, but Foundry is big on making sure that the actual rights holders are okay with stuff. So I think we're just waiting on the people to provide the appropriate authorizations and whatnot.
Gotcha.
Yes, it is absolutely something that we are aware of, and I think we just need to hammer out in much the same way that the one that was created for Roll20 was done, of figuring out exactly what the Foundry situation will be.
Fair enough. I have a small update.
I know that they have been worked on, and I absolutely would love to see it released and available.
Very nice. A small update for the fan who created the Steps online character sheet. My group has 2 players who are using that and absolutely love it, that it does all the math for you when you go to raise up your talents.
Yes.
So
thank you to Lars for the work on
Yes.
that. That's a great little character tracker. There is both a web version and a desktop version, which is basically a standalone web browser that just runs that page. And you can actually export the data file from one and import it into the other because it's the same thing.
yeah.
Works pretty well.
It does.
The improvements that have been provided in there are fantastic.
Yeah. Like I said,
come
two of my
quite a
players absolutely love it, and they're using it. And if they just want to share the screen so the game master can see what their character's looking at and make sure they're rolling the right dice, you can do so. So yeah, it's a high-tech version of a low-tech solution, so that works for us as well. So anyway, want to give everyone an update. So if you haven't used the Steps character sheet, please do so. If it'll make your gaming life a little bit easier, by all means, have at it. Thank you. So on to how to build your character. You've made your first Elementalist, human, dwarf, to scrang, whatever, and you're ready to go pick out some spells. This is what our discussion about for today is going to be, is how these spells will be beneficial to you and your campaign as you begin to play through it. So Elementalism is fun. First circle, first spell, Air Armor. This is the meat and potatoes.
This is a very popular Elementalist spell. This provides a +3 bonus to physical armor, and at GM's discretion will also reduce the effects of fatigue, because in addition to the added padding, it also provides ventilation. So as the description says, it is popular with fire mining crews working near Death Sea.
Yes.
It does require that the target be wearing some kind of clothing to effectively trap the air inside of it. It's a fantastic defensive spell, and Elementalists tend to pick that up.
Yeah. And you look all big and poofy.
Yeah.
Because you have this large billowing amount of air between your skin and your clothes. And so it makes you look all big and poofy where your belt isn't shining. So you look like a stuffed sausage. So it's fun, though. It's a great little effect. And those little details you get to work in for your players to hear. So they see somebody else walking around and they got this puffy clothing. Just little things to look at and make sure your character notices. Crunch Climb. Yes.
Because this got brought up in the email, the Elementalist Circle 5 ability allows the Elementalist to spend a point of karma to target an additional ally with a spell. So that would change Air Armor, which is normally a single target spell, unless they weave an extra thread.
Yeah.
But they can spend a karma point to target an additional ally with it.
Yeah. Very nice.
So what is normally a single target spell can become a multi-target spell.
Yeah. So Crunch Climb. And this is just basically enhancing your climbing ability.
Yeah, it's similar to Wall Walker, which is a low circle wizard spell. It provides a bonus to climbing tests. This was something that pretty straightforward enhancement spell.
And we talked about the uses of it when you're playing a wizard character is the same as playing the Elementalist character is. You never figure out how much you need to climb something until you can't do it well.
Until you need to climb something. Yeah. So it has, is a very similar utility when it comes to the Elementalist as Wall Walker does for the wizard.
Yeah.
Like many other bonus providing spells, it provides the bonus. The character does not necessarily need to have the talent or skill in order to take advantage of the bonus, because climbing does default to dexterity.
Yeah.
So it will provide a +3 bonus there. And generally, it's a good spell to know so that you can bring it out when it's needed. It's probably not one that you're going to see, like, that you're going to require in your matrix all the time.
No. I every time Wall Walker or Crunch Climb come up in conversation, in the back of my head, I'm reminded of a phrase I read in a book 30-odd years ago. The kitten can find its claws when it needs to climb the tree. On to Earth Darts. A 0-thread spell. This one is also the meat and potatoes of your offensive capabilities.
This is the Elementalist basic attack spell. It does physical damage, so it is mildly hampered by the fact that you're typically going up against higher armor ratings with physical than you are with Mystic, which the other 3 disciplines have.
Yeah.
The advantage that Earth Darts has is that the side effect reduces the target's physical armor. so that even if you don't end up doing a lot of damage with it, you reduce their armor, which makes subsequent castings of earth darts more effective as the sort of magic weakens the armor temporarily. But it also provides increased damage potential for anybody else who might be hitting that target.
Yeah, and is the reduction in physical armor a new wrinkle for 4th edition? Because I don't recall that being there previously. Okay, making sure.
It is new. It's one of those things that, much like the secondary effect of Mind Dagger from Wizard, or each of the basic attack spells has a secondary effect that helps emphasize the flavor and focus of the magician discipline that uses it.
Yeah. So the more you hit with earth darts, the more the armor goes down. The more you hit with earth darts, the more the armor goes down. So just keep pummeling them.
The secondary effect doesn't stack on itself. So it's still only the -2 physical armor with the base effect. You can weave a thread to do an additional -2 physical armor.
Yeah.
For each additional thread. So that effect does not stack with itself, but the duration, as long as you are continuing to hit the target with earth darts, that duration is going to continue because it lasts through to the end of the next round after you cast it. So if you cast it on the target, they have -2 for the rest of that round and the next round, which will give you a chance to hit them with earth darts again and kind of continue that penalty moving forward.
Well, and it's something that everybody else benefits from as well, is they get to hit and have the negative physical armor also be in effect when they hit.
Right.
Regardless of who's hitting. So it helps everyone.
In much the same way that a spell effect that provides a penalty to physical defense, for example, will benefit other members of the group as well, because the lower physical defense means that other people are likely to hit and do damage and potentially do extra damage with, lower thresholds for those breakpoints.
On to Flame Weapon, our third 0-thread spell, because Crunch Climb is 1. So this is just, this puts fire on whatever you want it to for a weapon for everybody else.
Adds a D6, a step 4 fire damage onto the weapon. Similar to Iron Hand, I think is the name of the wizard spell. It has a similar damage enhancing effect. The difference with Flame Weapon is that it's fire, so it can actually set things on fire.
Yes, and do fire damage the next round.
It doesn't damage the weapon at all, but you can use the flames to set things alight.
Yeah.
Act as a torch or a light source, potentially. I would probably allow that.
I have.
And against enemies that might be vulnerable to fire in some way.
Yeah. So
that can certainly come in handy.
You can definitely use Flame Weapon on a wooden club, not set the club on fire, but whatever the fire touches will set fire to other things. That's just the nature of how magic works. We all know that. But yes, Flame Weapon and Earth Darts are bread and butter for Elementalists. On to the other 1-thread spell, Heat Food.
Heat Food is probably one of the most popular First Circle Elemental spells that is there.
Nobody likes cold rations.
This is one of the spells that gives Elementalists their reputation for being healers, being healing adjacent at least.
Yes.
Because they cast the spell and eat a meal, and the people who eat the meal get a bonus to their recovery tests. There has been some errata issued on this that's in the official errata document. It's not made clear in the book, but it is in the errata document that the recovery test bonus needs to be used during the spell duration, that you need to make the recovery test while you are eating the meal.
Yeah.
That you can't eat the meal in the morning and then get into a fight and then for your first recovery test after the fight, get the bonus from Heat Food. You need to eat, you have to use that bonus while you are eating the meal. You can't delay it.
I understand it's not explicit, but that's common sense.
Well,
like I said, I understand it's not explicit, but yeah, I would.
Because it is not explicit, we had to make it explicit in the errata.
Welcome to gamers.
Because what ends up happening is you get people who start their day with a Heat Food and a booster potion and a whole bunch of stuff that provides a bonus to a recovery test, but they don't need to make a recovery test then. And then later in the day after they've gotten into a fight, oh, now I use my first recovery test and I get X, Y, and Z bonuses. It's not really how they're intended to work.
Same for potions. Potions are like instantaneous. You got to do it then and there.
Well, the booster potion is a bonus to the next recovery test. If they are not making a recovery test at that time because they aren't suffering any damage.
Mm-hmm. But I only make the test when I'm taking the potion.
So this is one of those cases where the letter of the law
and the spirit of the law
and the spirit are kind of different. I would also probably in my games have it be that if you're going to use a booster potion, you need to use it at the time you're making the recovery test. You can't chug one in the morning and then get the bonus of it later on. Like, that's sort of not how those are in
the 20 years I've been running and playing this game, none of my players have ever decided to be that much of a douche about that. So, yeah, they're all like, no, I'm taking the booster potion now because I need it now. I'm going to take my test now. Not I'll have it and save it later like a kangaroo pouch or a squirrel full of chipmunk thing, whatever. Anyway.
And heat food is kind of nice because it's a fixed difficulty. It's a difficulty 6 to cast it, and each success affects a meal. So it will take it does take multiple castings kind of at low circles. Mm-hmm. But once the magician has some good ranks on spell casting and can throw karma in on it and whatnot, it's not too difficult for them to do 3 or 4 meals per casting. Considering it only takes a couple of rounds to cast, it's pretty straightforward.
Exactly. Very easy. Purify Earth, another thread spell.
Purify Earth and the next one on the list, Purify Water. These are spells that, to be honest, are legacies from all the way back to first edition. I don't know that they necessarily see a lot of use. Purify Earth especially has kind of a limited use. It is flavorful. It is a spell that makes sense within the setting and makes sense within what it is that an elementalist is able to do.
Yeah.
But unless you are in a game that is dealing with corrupted areas and whatnot, a player character is not as likely to get use out of it.
Fair.
Purify Water, which is the companion spell to it, also at first circle.
Yeah.
Is apt to be a little bit more useful if you've got a game that is going to be dealing with survival situations and whatnot. Mm-hmm. Then the ability to make water safe is a good one. You can also use it in addition to just sort of purifying it, neutralize a poison before somebody has ingested it. It does have a resistance based on the potency of it. Yeah, those are kind of flavorful spells, but not necessarily useful in a huge number of situations.
Fair. I also love that Purify Earth can be placed in the same spell matrix as Purify Water. So
yes, this is one of the things. Wizard didn't have any spells that did this in the first couple of circles. One of the things that was brought in, and this is kind of goes along with the slight scaling back on the number of matrices that magicians had available. Mm-hmm. And this was a case in previous editions. Certain spells would not see a whole lot of use, in part because there was generally a better choice to have ready to go in a matrix.
Yeah. And
there are certain spells that are very similar, and we're going to talk about another one here in a moment, but Purify Earth and Purify Water are both one-thread spells. They both have this kind of purification element. The basic structure of them is similar enough that they could both be put in the same matrix, so that if the Elementalist knows both versions, they can have them both ready to go and then just decide at the time of casting, is it going to be the Purify Earth or is it going to be the Purify Water, with the idea being that the thread that needs to be woven before casting the spell designates the version that gets used. Kind of falls apart when you start talking about enhanced matrices because you're still able to put both in there. But this basically allows an Elementalist to have a little bit more variety, potentially get a little bit more utility out of the spells that they know, because in a sense they have extra slots.
Yeah.
For certain spells.
So back to first edition, since these are both holdovers, I had a player character who actually, anytime he was in a bar, used Purify Water to take the alcohol out of his ale so that he could act drunk and invite people to try and rob him and then not actually allow them to rob him. So it was just one of those fun things. He used it as a character defining thing. He's like, I'm never going to be drunk. I'm just going to act drunk instead. So it was one of those fun things he got to do with Purify Water. It just built in character. That's telling the stories. Resist Element.
This is the other spell that I was just referring to. There are actually 5 versions of this spell, one for each of the 5 Elementalist elements.
Yes.
They can all be placed into the same matrix. If the Elementalist knows all 5, all 5 of them can be placed within the same matrix so that they don't need to decide, oh, well, I'm going to have resist fire in, and then suddenly, oh, shoot, I wish I had resist air.
Yeah.
They can have them, if they wanted to have a resist available, they can have the resist available. Any of the Elementalist spells, I think, all of the Elementalist spells that have slightly different versions for different elements have this same feature that they can all be put in the same matrix. And so it's just a matter of the Elementalist choosing which element they're going to use.
At the time. But you do have to learn each of these 5 spells. You have to learn resist air, resist earth, resist fire, resist water, resist wood. You have to learn all 5 of those spells before you can put all 5 of them in the matrix.
Right. And you may decide for your Elementalist that you don't necessarily need to learn all 5, but once you get into higher circles and have some extra legend to burn, it's only 100 legend apiece for each version.
Yeah. Pick them all.
Maybe a little bit costly early on, but later on in your career, it's nothing.
Oh, yeah.
The basic effect for all of them is the same. It provides a +3 to both physical and mystic armor against any attacks that are of the type of the element.
Yeah. So, all very cool. Shelter. This is a massive thread spell. It's 4 threads at first circle.
Because this is not a spell that you're going to be breaking out
daily.
Well, you're going to be maybe breaking it out daily.
Yeah,
but you're not going to be breaking it out in the midst of combat. It is not a high pressure, generally speaking.
I got to do this now. No, too late.
But it allows the Elementalist to create a shelter. The base casting provides shelter for one person. You can weave extra threads to make additional space to allow more people in. Each success on the spellcasting test also creates extra space. But again, similar to Purify Water, this is a spell that is, if you're going to be having largely a city-based campaign, you're probably not going to see a whole lot of use out of it. This is a spell that is a lot more suitable to the wilderness and to travel.
Oh, yeah. This is your portable, inflatable, 2-3 person tent, depending on how well you roll in your successes.
And if you're not going to be dealing too heavily with survival conditions, it also might not end up being particularly useful. It may be something that you end up, depending on your character's experience level and whatnot, that you might know and kind of use as a bit of flavor rather than needing to cast it every time.
Yeah.
The utility of this spell will largely depend on the style of campaign that is being run.
Fair. Snuff, a 0-thread spell. Underutilized. Underrated.
Yeah. This basically extinguishes fires, which can be handy. If somebody is on fire.
One of my players is listening now and yelling at me because he is a pyromaniac character. He uses elementalism spells and has all of the fire spells you can possibly ask for. And it took him to like 4th circle to finally pick up Snuff because he's like, it would help if I could put those out. Yeah, occasionally it would.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
anyway,
occasionally it would.
Yeah, and so he's yelling at me on that one. So hi, waterproof doesn't seem all that helpful, but it actually seals an inanimate object against water.
Well.
Water damage is a thing.
Yeah.
Water damage is a thing.
Again, this is kind of a manipulating the elements. There are certain circumstances under which this spell could be particularly useful.
Yeah.
There are other games and situations where it might not get much use at all. This is one of the kind of drawbacks in a little bit of the Elementalist spell kit, at least at low circles. There are certain spells that I think even a little bit more than the wizard spells that we talked about.
There's a word.
Are only situationally useful.
Yeah.
And if you are not in a style of game where those situations are likely to come about, it may feel like your spells are not as useful as they otherwise would be.
Yeah, starting out. But I've always told people at first circle, your first circle you can have up to 6 or 7 of these. There's 15 here, because with the variant on Resist Element, there's 5 total. So there's 15 here at first circle, essentially. So really, your first circle out of 15, you're the noob. You're going to be, on the back end of things for a while. So at second circle, you can finally get some other spells and things. Yeah, you'll broaden up as you get there. But these are the meat and the potatoes, the bread and butter. You'll use these more often than not.
Yeah, this is where I think I can recognize a little bit where the feelings of there aren't enough spells might come from. Mm-hmm. The Elementalist is one of the most popular magician disciplines.
Agreed.
And if you look at the first circle spells that they have, you've got Flame Weapon, you've got Earth Darts, you've got Heat Food, and Air Armor.
Yeah.
Of those ones that we went through, that's half of them. And then you've got the 2 Purify spells, the Resist spell, Shelter, Waterproof,
Snuff.
Crunch Climb.
And Snuff. Yeah.
So if you happen to be in a game where your situational spells, you are not getting into the situations where they are useful, it might feel like, it's not that I've only got 4 spells. It's more that I've only got 4 useful spells. Or it feels like I've only got 4 useful spells. And so in that case, I think it really behooves the game master to, much like you would with any character really that's in the game, when you are designing and developing your scenarios, your adventures, your encounters, that you take into account what the player characters are capable of and build in places where their stuff can be useful. In much the same way that a character who makes a Beastmaster is in some way telling you, I want to have a game that revolves in some sense around animals and animal companions, then you need to build that into the game for them.
Yes. If
someone takes an Elementalist as a character, as a magician, you need to look at the spells and say, okay, they're wanting to maybe deal with elements and maybe down the line spirits and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But also maybe situations where their utility spells, their situational spells are going to come in handy and be useful, so that there is at least some kind of sense of choice that they're going to need to make when they're dropping spells into their matrix early on.
Yeah.
And these are things that can be brought up in a initial session 0 campaign planning, character creation kind of phase, but also in the ongoing conversation about what's going on in the game. If a character who is playing a player who has an Elementalist character, is expressing some frustration about how they don't feel like that they have a whole lot of useful stuff, then you need to look at what they've got and figure out ways to make more of it useful.
Fair. Because they don't get elemental tongues until 3rd circle and elemental hold until 4th circle. So we're talking, this is your very first circle character in your spell selection.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's fair. I'm talking not necessarily just about the very beginning. I'm talking about broadly speaking.
No, agreed. I understand your point entirely. I'm just saying for the listener who's listening in going, I have a first circle character. Here's my spell selection. And the Elementalist, as we have gone over in the Elementalist podcast, that discipline breakdown, this is centered around talking to the elemental spirits as well. So since they don't get that till 3rd, these are the spells they rely on day in and day out until they get to that experience.
Generally, when you're looking at a discipline, and this is the case for the most part for all of them.
Agreed.
But for magicians in part, especially because so much of their early stuff is taken up by giving them the talents they need to be able to cast spells.
Yes.
Most disciplines don't get what I would consider their full starter kit until they get into 3rd or 4th circle.
I agree.
And have those extra discipline talents, but also have gotten enough talent option slots that they can steer the flavor of their discipline choice along the path that they want to.
I look at first circle as kind of like elementary school, second circle is middle school, and third circle is high school. Once you graduated to third circle, okay, now you're good to go in the larger world of bar save. Knock yourself out. So since you can pick up a second circle spell at character creation. We're going to go through the second circle spells as well because we have time to burn. And, you get to second circle rather quickly anyway. And then once you get there, here's some more available options to you. So Air Mattress, which I have always loved, is a good idea.
This is the other spell that brings the reputation of healing to the Elementalist. This is the spell that you cast when you are setting up camp for the night, and everybody who takes advantage of it gets a little bit of a bonus to their morning recovery test.
Yes. And oddly enough, I can guarantee, even though I don't live in Barsave and have never had the spell cast on me, it feels better than any air mattress I've ever actually inflated on a concrete floor. So just going to say that now. Fingers of Wind. This is the 2-thread kind of like telekinesis. Kind of. It gives the Elementalist the ability to do some distance fine manipulation of things. Yeah.
And acts as a dexterity step. The effect acts as a dexterity step for the purposes of trying to do stuff. It can't move a lot of weight, but you can be potentially creative with this. It's got a decent duration.
Yeah.
So it does allow some stuff to be done.
Yeah, I've always equated the look of this as it looks like the Muppet Show trying to make something levitate. So it's a little clumsy, a little awkward. It gets the job done, but yeah, it looks kind of like that. It's not.
If you're working in your lab or doing some enchanting or whatever, Fingers of Wind can grab the tool and bring it over to you.
Yes. In real life, I would use this hourly.
This is one of those spells that in the hands of a creative player can be amazing.
Yes.
Again, situational, but if you put the situations in where it can be used and you have a creative player who can take advantage of it, that can be quite the sight, I imagine.
I've had some creative players. They have challenged me on a lot of what Fingers of Wind do this? Kinda, I guess. Roll, try and hit a higher number. Go from there. Icy Surface. This one has created
This is a long-standing legacy, fantastic Elementalist spell.
And 0 threads.
This is a zone control type spell. Mm-hmm. The Elementalist slaps down an area that becomes difficult to traverse. People need to make tests in order to successfully navigate it without falling down, and generally also are slowed down.
Yeah.
So yeah, it can be an effective kind of area denial, not completely denial, but area control and suppression type of ability. If you're going against a group, throwing an icy surface down can potentially take opponents out of the fight, at least temporarily, or force them to navigate perhaps the longer way around to get at your group. There's a lot of potential uses for this spell, and it is kind of a popular one.
Very much so, especially when they either throw in when you get to use will force on this and you really get the step numbers higher for your effect test. I've tried to have, Jehuthra roll a dexterity on a 37 effect test for Icy Surface. That's never going to happen. So, those are fun.
This can be a very, very, very effective area denial, area control type spell.
Yes, because if they fail, they're knocked down. And as we all know, being knocked down at Earthdawn is a very bad thing.
It's a bad thing.
Mantle.
The only drawback to Icy Surface and having people be knocked down on it is that any of your allies who might go in to try and take care of them while they're down in melee are also going to be dealing with the Icy Surface.
Yes.
So generally, you either are having ranged attacks against them or Windlings. Windlings really like Icy Surface because they can just fly over it and not have any problems whatsoever.
Plus, they see the reflection and go, ooh, pretty. Yes, Mantle of the Woodland. You're squinting at me about the Windling crack. Windlings are occasionally distracted easily.
That is vicious slander.
Oh, it's okay. I love Libel's print. I love Windlings. They're great. Mantle of the Woodland Hunter. It's another 0
This is a new spell for 4th edition. This is the first of a few mantle spells that the Elementalists get. Mm-hmm. This is kind of the beginning of some of their work with spirits. This is a spell that summons a spirit and binds it temporarily into a willing target. Wow. And provides them with bonuses while the effect lasts. It increases their movement rate. It provides bonuses to tracking and similar types of effects.
Yeah.
But the target needs to pursue the spirit's desire, because it is a kind of a very focused spirit summoned for a particular purpose. And so they need to fulfill that purpose. And if they fail, or if they are diverted or something happens to kind of break the conditions, then there are some penalties that apply for a while. And all of the various mantle spells, both for the Elementalist and the Nethermancer and the Shaman as well. The Shaman gets some of these. All play with spirits in a way that I really like. I like the expansion of some of the spirit stuff that comes about with this spell.
Yeah. And the last sentence, this spell may only have one active casting at a time. So this is once a day.
This is the case for most of these. It's not spelled out, but I kind of like to look at it as this is an arrangement, a sort of prearranged bargain of a sense. Mm-hmm. The spell summons a particular spirit to do a particular task, kind of getting around the whole more freeform summoning rules. Because a magician largely can only summon a single spirit, they can only have one spell of a particular spell. They can only have one going at a time.
Yeah. So I like it. It's a wonderful addition, especially for a 0-thread spell that lasts a few minutes. Yeah. Not bad for second circle. Shield Willow, also a very, very useful spell.
It is limited in the sense that it does require the target to have a shield, but it does provide both a +2 to physical and mystic defense, because shields provide defense bonuses now instead of armor like they did in previous editions. They provide defense bonuses. Those bonuses are enhanced both physical and mystic. This is a decent defensive spell. Great for putting on a warrior who might be fighting sword and board. Swordmaster, who at lower circles is likely to be using a shield as well before they get into Journeyman and pick up a second weapon.
Yeah. And weaponsmiths.
Yeah, it's a good enhancement defensive spell.
Yeah, I like the boost there. And the last one, Slow Weapon.
This is also a defensive spell in a sense, but it targets enemies. The idea behind it is that it is thickening the air that the weapon is moving through and therefore slowing it down, and it therefore does less damage when it hits. Nice.
So that's not bad. What do we got there? Like 20? So 6. So 6 at second circle and 15 at first circle, essentially with the resist element 5 variation there. You've got 21 spells in your first 2 circles.
And in the second circle spells, you get a lot more broadly useful spells than you do with some of the first circle stuff. The first circle stuff kind of sets a lot of flavor. The second circle spells that are in the book are ones that are generally more broadly useful. I think probably of them, the most potentially limited in what you can do with it is Fingers of Wind, but that one I think is largely limited more by the creativity of the person using it than anything else. Mantle of the Woodland Hunter is also kind of specific, but it's just cool.
It's niche, but yeah, very cool. You can't really use that in the city a whole lot of places unless there's a potted plant around, but otherwise, and I'm teasing about the potted plant, but yeah, otherwise, when you're in the right setting, those are going to be great. I mean, you don't use snuff every day unless there's a fire you want to put out, but again, all of those are meant for specific generalized
I could see
situations.
When they're breaking camp for the morning and setting out that the Elementalist uses snuff on the fire to make sure that it's out.
Yeah. So if you want to get all fancy with it instead of kicking dirt on it, sure.
Because there's no limitation in Earthdawn in terms of how many times you can cast a spell.
Exactly.
It would be, and I'm going to maybe casting it out of their grimoire rather than necessarily having it in a matrix, or even maybe having it in a matrix because swapping the spells out that you've got isn't that difficult.
Yeah.
Okay, we're breaking camp. I cast snuff on the fire as people are packing up, and then I'm going to spend 10 minutes to reattune and swap out.
Yeah, well, we're all getting ready to go. So that is your breakdown of the first and second circle elementalism spells. We hope that clears up a couple of uses that you could use them for. You've heard some stories about how they were used in my games, and maybe something you didn't quite understand how it worked previously. Now you have a better understanding of that. We hope that actually helps all the players out there and some of the game masters to kind of nudge your players in certain directions to maybe pick up spells that would be better for them than the ones they have, or what to add to their kit as they move on. So any final thoughts on the elementalism spells? As you said, it's one of the more popular magician disciplines to play. And so it's got a nice little toolkit once you get into this first, more useful everyday first and second circle spells.
Just to reiterate that idea that the game master should be presenting challenges and situations that, at least to some extent, are suited to the player characters in the group.
Yes.
If you've got an elementalist in the party, you want to provide them with opportunities to use other of the spells that they have.
Yes.
Not necessarily in every encounter or every adventure, but you do want to look at that potential so that they have some spotlight time as a result of that and don't feel like, oh, I've only got 4 useful spells because I start off by casting Flame Weapon on the warrior and or swordmaster. Then if the combat's still going on, then I cast Earth Darts. And then when it's over, I cast Heat Food so that people can get a bonus to the recovery test that they make from the damage they suffered at combat.
Yeah.
And that's all that I do. And I can recognize that as being frustrating.
Yeah.
But that you need to look at adventure and scenario and situation design as more than just combats, that you need to look at non-combat situations and come up with ways, much like if you have a troubadour in your group and you're not providing them the opportunity to be social, they're not necessarily going to be happy.
Yeah, they're not going to play their best
with what's going on. So you need to look at your group composition. And obviously, if you've got a warrior, you're going to need to present them with options, opportunities to punch things or stab things or whatever. But that is something that feels part and parcel of a normal role-playing game adventure situation. Like, oh yeah, we're going to have a combat. But you need to look at the other situations as well, the social and the environmental and puzzles and situations there that allow characters who have situational abilities to put them into situations where they can use those abilities.
Yeah, and not just the spells. I mean, yeah, we're doing it for the Elementalists because that's the episode that we're on, but also their talents that maybe have an obscure, I can't say obscure, but a lesser used talent that they sit there and go, why am I spending points on this thing ever? I never use it. Give them the opportunity to use that one as well and really fully flesh out their character development throughout the course of the play. So
we've done what we can in the framework of the talent options list.
Yes.
To minimize the number of discipline talents, that is the ones that everybody of a discipline gets, to try and minimize the number of those that feel worthless, that feel wasted, because we want players to enjoy their characters and to want to play their characters.
Yes.
And that the more situational talents and abilities tend to be relegated to options, so that you can design your character the way that you want if there's a particular flavor or style, or so that if in the planning phase of a campaign, this is largely going to be a wilderness and care delving kind of game, I don't need to maybe look so much at these options that are more suitable for a politics and city type social interaction style of game.
Exactly. So, folks, we hope that helps you out with your elementalism selection as far as spells are concerned. Thank you both to the listeners who wrote in on the emails. We will hear from you next time. Until next time, it is time for you to go commune with the spirit of your own legend.
Good night, everybody.